Right, welcome back to Watch Collecting. Today we're doing a chat that we've been wanting to do for ages, and that is a deep dive collector's guide to IWC. Now, for anyone who's been watching the content on Watch Collecting, you probably recognize the person sitting next to me, but I think more than ever, having Emily Marsden here for an IWC chat, it just feels right.
It's perfect, perfect.
I think Emily is known for being a IWC collector and enthusiast, I would say.
Yeah, fan, fanatic, enthusiast, all those things. Yeah, for sure.
Yep. So this seems like the right chat to have, but what we're going to do is break this down into a 3-part series looking at neo-vintage and modern IWC references. We're not going to dive too deep into the old history of IWC. This is going to be 3 parts, neo-vintage to modern, looking at the tenure of 3 CEOs. Now, make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy this content, because being a 3-part series, you want to be notified about when parts 2 and 3 come out, and we hope you enjoy this chat. Let's get stuck into it.
Go.
This is big. I love this because the first part we're going to cover is 1980 to 2000.
Yeah.
It's the Günter Blümlein era. And to me, this feels like probably the most important series, the most important part of this series. Yeah. It's a hugely important time for IWC.
Yeah, I don't think that there's arguably no modern IWC without that. He built the foundation.
Indeed, without a doubt. And before we started filming, we were talking about all of the things that he did at that brand. And I was doing some research, and it really reminded me of how prolific he was in that time. And some of the things that we covered and we were researching were like complications, introduction of ceramics. Just the list is so long and wide. But let's start. I actually wanted to start with something that we have on the table, which we just sold on the platform, and that is the Grand Complication. Because for me, it kind of frames what the watch world was like at the time. Coming out of the quartz crisis, brands were investing heavily in movement technology and trying to prove the romantic side of mechanical watchmaking. And to me, this kind of sums that up.
Yeah, it sums up Blumlein. I feel I also love that you lived through this era. This is the era that got me into the brand, but obviously don't remember it. But the Blumlein era is, if you had to summarize it, would be high complications, deep technical watchmaking, and progressing of horology at a time when brands were just trying to survive, right? Brands were just, like you said, you mentioned the quartz crisis, but imagine just making that thing. In fact, we have a good display here, like the 3755 being the first ceramic watch. This is in his tenure. This is in the 80s, very early 80s. He's not even been in that long. It's like, okay, what do we do now? Do we go... I think he took a bet. It's fair to say, the future is proper watchmaking. Ignore the quartz stuff. That's just noise, and it will have its own things that come out of it, and they'll be great. But IWC is first and foremost the watchmaker's brand.
One thing that hits me immediately about these watches is that many people look at IWC as a utilitarian pilot watch brand that makes simple time-only watches. But you look at this and you're like, pioneer of ceramics, Grand Complications. These watches really put IWC on the map.
It's probably worth noting that at this point, when Gunter joined in 89? No, a little before that, sorry.
80.
When Gunter joined in 1980. 1989 was when Taylor Swift was born. That's probably why I got it confused. When he joined, the IWC market didn't exist. There wasn't really, you think of IWC today, and it's probably quite easy to listen to this and go, well, obviously IWC made this watch and sold the watch. No, there was no market. He came in on the back of a bunch of VO, I think it was the group, and almost established IWC in a commercial way that allowed people later on to expand that commercial grounding. So when I agree with you, and I hadn't quite thought about it that way, IWC is thought now as a rugged pilot's watch. Love that. Love the 46mm big pilot. But actually, originally, you've got a 39mm ultra complicated watch. You've got the 3750 to 3755. You've got really serious chops and material science and material innovation, which I would even link back into the today. It's still something that is really deep in the IWC DNA, is material science and being a watchmaker's brand.
Well, let's phrase it this way. This watch, right, Grand Complication, a couple of years later, we then get a watch that was labeled the workhorse of Schaffhausen.
I will not try to pronounce it, the non-English version.
Yeah, I didn't want to go down that path either. But that watch was considered the most complicated watch in the world at the time.
Yeah.
That's a massive accolade for IWC, for the pilot's watch brand. You know, that's how a lot of people know it. That's crazy to me.
1993, most complicated watch at the time. Again, why do that? And why do that unless you're a brand that's fundamentally obsessed with being known for your technical chops? First and foremost. I almost, dare I say it, the man was running, by 1994, JLC, he was running Lange, and he was running IWC. All three of those brands I love and collect. All three of those brands have really clear DNA, I would say. You think of Lange, you think of sort of German materials, you think of ultra well-finished, design coded watches. You think of you think of Jersey, you think of the Reverso, right? You think of the watchmaker's watchmaker. You think of IWC, and I would say up until Chris's tenure, I thought of big, rugged pilot's watches, but Chris has brought back that spirit of watchmaking, for example, with the Eternal Calendar. All three of those brands, Günter Blümlein was the architect of, all three of those brands are, I would argue, successful today because of him.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. And I think it's important to look at what he achieved at IWC, because I think he covered all the bases, right? He came in and said, right, IWC is going to be a movement maker, a brand that's known for watchmaking, makes a Grand Complication. Then he says, right, well, let's also pioneer ceramics and like make that a big part. That's an aesthetic component to his tenure too. And another area that needs to be covered off and chatted about. And, you know, let's dive into that a little bit, because this is Emily's watch. And I think it's worth you speaking a little bit about this watch, what attracted you to buying it, and a little bit of story behind you purchasing and finding it.
This thing, I just always love that. Every time I pick it up, it looks brand new. It's from the 80s now. It's definitely not brand new. And I've worn it a lot. Why did I buy it? So I watched the Talking Watches episode in like 2013 with John Mayer, and he spoke about the 5002 Big Pilot. And that was a moment for me where I was like, I gotta have a 5002. I was super young. And then probably, 2022 or somewhere around that time, I went to IWC and I didn't really get it. Like, I just wasn't charmed because I'd seen them in Watch of Switzerland and whatever. And then they sent me the book. Well, I begged. I say they sent as if they were, I asked, and then they sent me this 1,000-page book. And I said, I'll get back to you once I've read it. And I read this book, and I read about their material science and the role that they played in titanium, whilst not being proprietary to the role in using it, the role that they played in pure ceramic or zirconium oxide, which is this, the role that they played in titanium down the line. I was like, right, that's it. That's the angle I got to go down here, is collecting what they're really good at, which is material science. And in this book, it spoke about this exact watch, which is the 3755. This was created by Kurt Klaus, who's the peak Blumlein era. This was dreamt up in the early 80s as a response directly as a response to the quartz crisis. We're not going to bother with that. We're going to make, this was the first crown operated, meaning that you change all the functions only by the crown. These are the chronograph pushers. Crown operated perpetual calendar, entirely designed by Mr. Kurt Klaus. Then they went, well, actually, hang on a minute. So that was the 3750. What can we do with the case? It was originally brought out in gold. And these bad boys were produced. There were 20 in white, which was really hard at the time to make a coloured ceramic. Around 50 were made in black. And there's, I believe, one in like a teal and one in a pink. There's a rumour that there's another secret one in green, but I haven't confirmed that. To this day, I mean, I literally said in the video, I want this watch, and there are maybe 5 that exist. I mean, if I drop this, I actually asked Chris himself. I was like, if I drop it, what will happen? He was like, I don't know, you got no watch anymore, like, it's gone. 7 exist that I know. 7 exist in the world from the 20 that were originally created, probably got lost, broken, whatever. But for me, this is peak IWC. It's beautiful aventurine moon phase. It's, why do you need to know all this stuff? Why does a watch need to be able to do it? It doesn't need to, but it's the spirit of IWC in that time, the spirit of Kurt Klaus, the spirit of Blumlein.
It's a lovely watch. And I think the fact that there's sort of, 7 that you know of.
Yeah, I know of, yeah.
And like we were saying before, someone dropped it, maybe someone, like there was some damage, couldn't repair the case, it got discarded. Like they feel so rare and precious. And also like it's such a pioneering material to use at that time, right?
I actually asked Chris, just after I won GPHG, he was on a high. So I literally said to him, like, why are you running away from me? And I'm going to ask you those questions. And he was amazing. He actually stood there at the Christmas party for like a good 45 minutes chatting. And I asked him if he'd ever bring this back. And he just said no. Ultimately, no. It's too, the case design, the stepped case, it's too, almost like the opposite of the ethos now of rugged watch.
Sure.
So easy to break, but it's just deeply artisanal. And it's just an ode, I think, to an era. It's a perfect ode to an era.
Let's stay on ceramics for a bit, because part of Blumlein's tenure was also leaning in on pilot's watches. And I think of the 3705 because it's like the pilot's watch in ceramic, chronograph. That's to me one of the most important IWCs of this era, for sure.
Highly, highly collectible as well.
Yes.
Like, if you're an IWC aficionado, the 3705 is up there, right?
I think it's one of the top.
Yeah,
one of the top. And to me, that really exemplifies watches from IWC of that era. Utilitarian, but also having some, technological upgrades, which in the 80s and 90s would have felt very futuristic.
Yeah, I forget about that actually. I don't, because again, it's sort of hard to contextualize yourself. What was going on in the 80s? Like, what was high tech in the 80s? What was high tech in the 90s? Because I think if we look back in time, we almost think, well, obviously you made a ceramic watch. There was just no need for it. These things were really hard to do. And the only reason you would ever want to do it in the 80s is to prove that you could. And that's it.
Yeah, but it's also very easy to become accustomed to modern technology and then forget what it was like before. So you look at say the Vinci, or you look at an old IWC pilot's watch in ceramic and you go, it's in ceramic, because so many watches now are made in ceramic. But back then it would have been such an amazing feat, something 100%. That you're just not used to seeing. So I think it's really important to highlight that. And particularly if you're someone who's looking to get into collecting IWC, for me, they're the kind of watches you want to look out for. Obviously, there's no bargains in the watches that we just spoke about, because they're already very collectible. But if you're someone who really wants to own the ultimate IWCs from the Blumlein era, these are the kind of watches that you should look at.
I agree, and I think there are probably a few watches that if we were going to describe Blumlein with, you'd have to include the Da Vinci, Perpetual. You'd have to include that, or the Workhorse. A Pilot.
Yes.
Would we go 3705? Maybe.
I think the ultimate is 3705, I think, yeah.
I think if you had any of those watches, and I do think there's an appreciation now. I was in Geneva last year watching an auction, actually another 3755. It went crazy. Like, I'm talking multiples of what I paid. And not that that's remotely what it's about, but I think there's a renewed appreciation for the 80s and 90s at the moment. And I read something that's quite cool, which is because people that were sort of like couldn't buy those watches in the time have now reached an age where they can buy them. And there's an element of nostalgia and going back. And then you cross that with proper mechanical watchmaking, or things that, and we use this phrase quite a lot, did it move horology on? Or was it just a cool watch? And I think it's really fair to say almost everything Blumlein did moved horology on, which the other two have got great things about them, but I don't think you can strictly say that with the same confidence it moved horology on.
Yeah. The watches we've spoken about are, I would guess, are on the higher end of collecting IWC price-wise. But I think what makes this era of IWC particularly appealing is that there are also some bargain watches that you can buy that have so much history and provenance. And I wanted to talk about the reintroduction of the Mark Series.
Yes.
So let's go back. Mark 11 was one of the Dirty Dozen pilot's watches supplied during World War II. Blumlein brought that back with the Mark 12 and then the Mark 15. Two of my favorite versions of the Mark, right? Just beautiful utilitarian styling. Nothing that you don't need. Yeah. Perfect proportions, right? And you can also pick them up fairly affordably.
Yes.
Yeah, like a Mark 15 you could probably buy for £2,500 to £3,000.
Pure IWC.
It's pure IWC.
That's on the wrist. You're like, that's cool. I respect that. That's a really cool thing. And the Mark is, I actually have no idea, but if I was to imagine what IWC sell the most of, the Mark has to be up there. Just it's sort of framed as the somewhat, entry level watch, but they have a great story around it. It was exactly this, that they have genuinely, it was created for aviators during war to go do their thing. And after the war, Germany after the war for the Royal Air Force, you mentioned the Dirty Dozen. You want to talk about collectible as well. That's insane stuff. And if somebody, I bought the Langer off the guy, and I said to him, like, why the Langer? He said, I just love the story of the fact that it fell apart, during basically Cold War era, and then it got revived again. And I love that, historical romance to it. And I think there's probably a big element of a crossover between watches and war, and then pilots and planes. And IWC's got that spice, right, in that way. And I think very few brands, if any brand, can compete directly head on with the ultimate pilot's watch.
Oh yeah, I think they own that space. If we're being honest, many brands make pilots watches, but IWC, they've kind of,
there's no one else.
They're taking the reins on that for sure.
100%.
For sure.
100%.
The other thing I want to say in terms of collectible IWCs from this era, staying on pilots, we recently sold a doppelchronograph pilot's chrono, and to me that's another part of this Blumlein era IWC which really needs to be covered, and that's Richard Harbring and his contribution to watchmaking at IWC. And I'm looking at that watch selling for around £3,000. And I'm like, if you wanted to start collecting IWCs, that would be an incredible place to start.
It can almost be a one watch as well. It's got everything you could possibly want. And the fact that the guy now runs his own watch brand, and a lot of these innovations that were, sort of dreamt up then very much exist in his world. It's a very cool watch. It's and I think aesthetically very IWC.
It is. And also it reminds me that the watchmakers at IWC in that period were so celebrated that everyone seems to know Kurt Klaus and Richard Harbring, but do people know the names of watchmakers from brands during that time? I would argue no, but those names, they're known, right? People know their names.
I wonder why that is. I've never thought about it that way. Here were the people in the middle. Something I love about IWC actually is there's generally like an apprentice at some point that came up with something and then it got turned into a watch. Harbring being one, Marcus Buehler. I don't actually know the name, or I can't remember the name of the person that came up with the time. The night and day ball. Do you remember last year? Watches and Wonders. That was an apprentice. I think they put it into their school watch, and then IWC said, "Cool, we'll celebrate that, and we'll celebrate you." It's a real IWC thing, I think.
It is. It is. One thing though, I think IWC doesn't, or it doesn't fall into the conversation, is around dive watches.
Okay.
And I was looking at this before in the Blumlein era, and yes, okay, pilots' watches probably were the focus, but I was looking at the IWC Porsche design watches. I was looking at the Ocean 2000.
Yeah, that's a cool thing.
And I was like, that is such a cool piece that I don't think gets spoken about that much. They made the Ocean 2000. There was another one which they made for Navy mine clearance divers with anti-magnetic movement components. Once again, super ahead of its time.
Yeah.
And to me, another really great place to get into IWC as a collector.
Again, when we think of Blumlein, I think every piece of R&D or just work that came out of his era was purposeful. It was intentional. It moved things forward. It wasn't just marketing, right? Never mind the posters. We'll come to that in a second. One watch that really stands out to me is the Deep one. So it was the first dive watch with a pressure gauge, and it came quite literally with a pump that you calibrate the watch. And I think you definitely calibrate it. I don't know if it actually pumps stuff into it. But again, they maybe made 500 of them, but this thing which is indestructible, and someone actually generally described the pump itself as super collectible, or a piece of art. The pump is a piece of art, apparently. But a good example of the Blumlein era. Now coming back to the posters, you know the posters. You know about the posters.
I do know about the posters, and I also know that it's a kind of marketing strategy that wouldn't fly these days.
How quickly do you think IWC would be cancelled for any of those posters?
Immediately for any of them. Yeah, we'll put a few up on screen so you know what we're talking about. If you haven't seen it before. A few of you will have some. You will have some, and it was great. Look, I completely think it was an amazing piece of marketing from the 80s and 90s that suited that era. No doubt about it. There's one, I think actually the Da Vinci, it says, still not as complicated as a woman. Brilliant.
all kinds of, you get that whole vein, but it's almost peak IWC of the era.
It is.
It's a man's rugged thing.
It is. And in a world now where everything's marketed at everybody, it's interesting to look back at that and go, that it was a very clear mission statement. It's just a product engineered for men. And that was what they went with. It's a bygone era, but it's interesting to go back and look at it.
No, I completely agree. And the reality is that the market economics have changed, right? Women weren't into watches in the same way. A whole bunch of social things have happened. So you've got to look at it in context and see what it was. Of course, I don't want to see that from brands today, but it was brilliant and really encapsulates the era.
Well, things move, things change. And I guess that's a good place to stop and move on to the next phase of IWC. Yeah. So if you enjoyed this chat, make sure to look out, subscribe to the channel, and we'll be back soon with part 2 of this deep dive into IWC. Thanks for watching.